In this episode of the podcast, I have a discussion with Chris PreJean, who is a Christian scholar of Islam. Yes, you heard that right. In this discussion, we talk about the research he's done around Islam, how to tackle some of the misconceptions regarding Islam, and the role of interfaith dialogue in the modern world. One of the most interesting things about this discussion is his viewpoint in how Islam and Christianity need to have a better understanding of each other's religion in order to enhance their own faith. Check it out. So, hi, Chris PreJean. Nice to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Pleasure to meet you. So, welcome to the podcast. So, it's nice to have you as our guest. And I thought it would be best to introduce yourself to the audience briefly, and then we'll crack on with some questions.
Sure. My name is Dr. Chris PreJean, and I'm an expert in religion and did a PhD in Arabic and Islamic studies at the University of California. I like to describe myself as a historian of identity in the pre-modern period, but I work on all kinds of different subjects from religious literacy, multi-faith dialogue, and many others. Lastly, I serve as the director of a multi-faith program or project that renews the study of religion. It's called the Study of Religions Across Civilizations, and it's been ongoing for 10 years.
Brilliant. Great. All right. Awesome. Great to have you in. As you are aware, we have interacted on LinkedIn here and there, but this is the first time we got you on video. So you probably get asked this question a lot, and it just had to be the introductory question. Chris PreJean, Christian scholar in Islam. So how did you end up in this area? What sort of drove you towards it? It's kind of a unique position to be in, let's just say.
It is a unique position to be in. I think from an outsider's view, for me, it's really just a natural progression of life. The study of Arabic comes from my family background in Lebanon 3 generations ago, so I've always had this connection to Arabic. When I finished my undergraduate degree in theology, I knew I wanted to study Arabic, and so I went to UCLA, began reading texts, and before I knew it, I was reading Sharia texts. And finding myself studying the heritage of Christianity and Islam in the pre-modern period, and how this has evolved to me being a Christian scholar of Islam is really rooted in a principle that all life is sacred and valuable, that we all provide and bring something to the table despite deep differences, despite our backgrounds and the wisdom traditions that we draw upon, that we all have, some access to wisdom, and we can respect one another and bring intellectual solidarity, especially in the university, which aims to map the world, instead of bringing religiosity and our faith commitments to the academic field. And so I want to bring that knowledge to other Christians, especially those who live in near ignorance of a billion people in the world. And Islam is growing, and we need more infrastructure in the United States, as well as scholars who understand Islam and Muslims as they know themselves in their various expressions.
All right. I absolutely love that. And I think one of the things that sort of I found intriguing is the angle you're taking it, in the sense that all lives are valued, and it's kind of more of a, it gives me more of a unity kind of vibe rather than a, us versus them, which kind of sometimes, I think both parties are guilty of. So I know you've done quite an extensive amount of research work. So what would be sort of the main research work that you've been working on, and that you'd like to sort of raise awareness about for the audience who don't want to dive into the scholarly works.
So my research, the simplest way to put it, is that I study the Christian and Jewish meme,
All right.
the kind of literary figure in Islamic literature, and how that has changed or remained the same over time. What's interesting is that we tend to, when we perceive what other people are like, we imagine them based on the knowledge that we have or that is transmitted to us, and that can be really limiting. And so my research was really talking about how Sharia uses this to be resistant in a way to political regimes, to different faith communities, and it has remained the same in many respects throughout time. But that brings me to another point, and how my research informs me is there's this tendency, I guess, to uh, study others as they exist in books, which is kind of the religious studies approach and how you build religious literacy. Kind of a funny term on knowing others' traditions and why they make the choices they make. But the study of others comes from a book and not relationship. And so, what I thought was just a PhD dissertation on these kind of fixed literary figures in texts really has approximated to something of, some kind of universal wisdom. Not that there's some, perennial faith that we're all traveling up the same mountain. Not that, but that truth is found in knowing other people and who they are as they understand it and studying together with them instead of as this like book image, because that really limits our ability, this polemical approach where my knowledge is one thing and your knowledge is another. While that might be the case in some instances, we all have something to bring. So, just an example, Christians that I know, evangelical Christians, will oftentimes draw from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and or Marcus Aurelius or whoever else, and find this really powerful wisdom. But then if they look to Islamic texts, won't see that, and that's kind of the pre-Christian stuff can be looked to for wisdom, but not other traditions. And I'm not saying all truth is relative, or I'm not taking a morally relative position, but just as kind of a basic truth or a basic principle is that we all have something to bring to the table. That really is my position, and I want to continue building relationships with others who are different than me, so that that literary shape, that book shape, transforms to something more meaningful and kind of reduces and pushes away the polemical approaches and the I know and you don't approach.
All right, yeah, and I'm just shaking my head here, and I don't want to hijack this, but it's so relevant because I'm just talking about me, as a Muslim, and obviously I go on YouTube and I see kind of like we mentioned, people talk about the Greeks and the Stoics, and I'm like, why doesn't anybody ever mention some of the nuggets of wisdom in Islam? And it's kind of what you said. There's sort of this. Um, yeah, I think you explained it better than me. Just sort of tendency to not see the wisdom, or because they've I don't know, seen it through this books or whatnot, and it's something that I've been very keen on. I'm like, why isn't there? Why don't they see some of the wisdom? Not to say that all of it, but there is some stuff that I'm sure anybody who's a bit with an open mind or open to it would see it. So I'm really fascinated about what you just said, and just sort of maps on to my question. So, what are some of the key misconceptions about Islam that you aim to address through your educational efforts?
I think there's actually little understanding in the first place. So just as a first step, I think one thing I'm trying to address is just to build knowledge. One of our roles as researchers, there's different ways that you can write research, but the most basic one is to teach people how to think. How should they understand a topic? And starting there, even before how does that information transform society or anything else, we have to understand. So a misconception is how to approach others, and that comes along. That has to be addressed by its antidote, which is relationship. So the idea that we can somehow, as Christians, dig into our traditions and then prove others wrong, while there's use in that, I suppose, the more beneficial is to build trust, because cooperation it kind of follows in the tailwind of trust, and you build a more sustainable intellectual solidarity, a more sustainable future in building together. Whether it's in community projects, whether it's at your workplace, or in the field of religious studies, which I'm focused on, it's actually knowing others as they know themselves. But some of the misconceptions, I think the largest misconception about Islam is on Sharia.
Mm.
It is a buzzword, and just a general understanding that Sharia isn't one thing. It's not a codified law. That
Mm.
it encompasses let's say, worship practices that aren't law as we might understand in the West, where it's, a crime and punishments and how you
Mhm.
dole out punishment. That's not what Sharia is. There's part of Sharia that does have those. A lot of Sharia has those aspects to it, and they can be used to create, man-made laws. And that what Sharia is to Muslims, which is following God's divine path, the path that He set before them, that is rooted in principles of charity and generosity and courage and justice, and this, in many respects, the same ethical order that the West also supports, but packaged in a different way. Um, Sharia is something, I think, that really needs to be. Um, I think someone like me, from a Christian perspective, has a role in educating other Christians, and I think that there needs to be a multi faith effort in understanding how this works in democracy. I mean, I think if I were to guess, and based on my experiences, if you were to ask a Christian what Sharia is, they would think of it as a code. They would think of it as something that is as imposed upon people to live a certain life. But the irony is that Sharia has been resistant to political regimes for all of its history. If you have any experience, like I do, if anyone does, and you're reading these texts, you understand that Sharia is a discursive tradition in conversation with itself and developing, and has been developing for 1400 years. But not only that, it it has served as kind of the stalwart, the pillar of ethical life by scholars who are resistant to political regimes who hijack ethics. And that's really the beautiful part about Sharia, is it has over all of these years um, remained in this beautiful ethical tradition, and speaking to power and speaking to on behalf of communities. And this traces back to the figure I studied, Ahmed ibn Hanbal, from the ninth century, who was, is the kind of paragon of speaking truth to power and not giving in to the theological whims of a political ruler. And so things on Sharia are need to be clarified. Um, and I'd say my last, I think the last point I would make is approaching others with merciful compassion, and seeing Islam as a religion of beauty, and also as seeing subscribers to Islam, believers, as it were, as valuable from a humanitarian point of view and from a point of view of citizenship, not from creedal formulas or speaking to others as if they don't have any handle on wisdom or truth. Um, I'm sure there's many more. I've looked over. I've looked over. There's so many misconceptions, almost that I could pick and choose any that are out there.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, this is great. So, as you sort of alluded to, and I love how you just framed it. I mean, if we were to put this as a, cut it and put it as a reel, I think this will help raise awareness to a lot of the issues. So, as you are aware, I'm based in the UK, and as you kind of alluded to, there's a lot of negative, and particularly the word itself, Sharia, it's kind of got this negative connotation. And it gets tossed around in the media as in it's this negative thing and it's imposed on Muslims and they're oppressed by it and so on. So correct me if I'm wrong, part of your initiative or the work you do is that you try to educate individuals, and as I saw from the web and organizations, you try to talk to them about like raising awareness and that kind of stuff. So what do you find most effective in doing that? Because for me personally, that has always been the struggle. I've always said, there's a lot of negativity, but how do you even, do you know what I mean? What are the strategies? Like spill the beans, or what do you
Yeah.
find effective in trying to, overcome those negativity or these misconceptions effectively? Like what works and so on from your experience.
I'm not sure anything works, um, because when I'm seeking to teach or educate other Christians about Islam, I am in effect going back to this kind of book image of Muslims instead
Mm.
of bringing them together. And so I've had less of an impact in my role as an individual Christian looking to educate, and there's not a lot of hunger looking to educate other institutions and individuals.
Hmm.
And what I found is most effective is for another program that I work for that works on the renewal of religion, and that's something I alluded to earlier. The study of religions across civilizations that brings scholars together who know Arabic, that are Christian and Jewish, alongside Muslim brothers and sisters to discuss their traditions in tandem, and that helps when times of violence come or when a war arises, because there's relationship there. It's not just about us versus them, as you really succinctly put. I don't think there's a way, and there's no hunger in the
No.
Christian community to know Islam. There's a pressing into their own traditions for protection. And what doesn't help is there's policies coming from governments and other places that have good intentions, and other people have taken this educational first step to know others better, but then take that step for people that they need to make themselves and expect that same trust or that same knowledge to transfer, and it doesn't, and it scares Christians to death. It puts them in a because again, trust is the first step, and through relationship, and then cooperation follows. It can't be imposed from top to bottom. It really does have to work on in small groups. It has to work in the workplace for those who work with others. It really does have to go from the ground up. Otherwise, it does become a coercion, and Americans in particular are resistant to that.
That's very interesting. So you've kind of alluded to it's kind of the most thing that you find success is that initiative you have where you meet with other scholars and sort of, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. So the idea is that they are then the medium, because these scholars are obviously they have their own followers or people who listen to them, and is the idea that by strengthening the dialogue between scholars they can help sort of get the message across to the people who listen to them. Is that kind of, from my understanding, how it works?
That's
Or
right.
all right.
Yeah, when you change individuals and we all change together, and I can tell you my story too
Yeah.
of my personal change. But when we do this, our publications, our orientation to a better moral order becomes really clear that this isn't an us versus them, that this is something that we do together, especially in a pluralistic society like the United States or the UK, where we bring our faith commitments to our politics, we bring them to our economic decisions, we bring them to our cultural life. And I'd be happy to share my own story, but
Yeah.
for the academic renewal, it really is about helping our future teachers and scholars write in a way that is effective and produce more public facing content, not just scholars talking to scholars, which is really useful, but studying the pre-modern period, for example. I mean, we can write all we want about the development of this figure and that figure and the development of intellectual life and all kinds of things, but if it's not public facing, open access, ungated material that is educating others, it really doesn't have an impact on a scholar's community or audience, and that's we need more public-facing scholars.
Definitely. So yeah, before we get into your personal experience, I think that's very interesting because I actually have was having a conversation today with my friend, and that was kind of what I was getting to. So I'm not into that realm. I'm just someone who's interested generally in theology, and as you mentioned, someone who has a hunger to learn more. And I remember telling him, yeah, it's good and all. You know, we have. I'm sure that there's good scholars in religion, Islam, and Judaism, and who are doing their thing. But it's, as you said, more public-facing material. Something that's, how can we get the message out there to, the 13-year-old who's going on YouTube or TikTok, or do you know what I mean? How do we sort of get more material or get across to them? Because as you know, they're scrolling through and they're watching, all this stuff, whatever, cat videos, whatnot. How do we target these kind of people? If that makes sense.
Yeah, and the most hateful voices get the loudest voice, and that's also a problem. Is how do we come together and talk to one another that in a way that's not fabricated, or it doesn't feel like it's forced? Because I've been to a lot of interfaith groups, and it can kind of feel like it is just looking for commonalities and not necessarily addressing our divine, that we all have are welcome to the table of theology and can access divine wisdom. Um, that seems to be something that's not done. Rather, it's an educational, simply educational, not relationship building venture. And I think the time to move forward is now, and we do it together, like we're doing even now. We're just talking about it, and we're getting good content out there that is uplifting and virtuous and considers others as better than themselves.
That's just, yeah, that's greatly put. And sort of just to go back to the point, I want to dive on your personal experience. So how did those sort of being a part of those organizations, shall I call them interfaith organizations? How did that shape your experiences, or yeah?
In 2019, I went on my first trip to Morocco, and prior to that, I had been in a doctoral program for 4 years.
All right.
So I started in 2015. By 2019, I was I'm everything that I'm saying is based on my experience. I was studying Islam and Christianity, for that matter, as a literary subject, as a subject of a text rather than a real life experience. And I was invited to go on this trip with Dr. Paul Heck from Georgetown University. He's a professor of theology who founded the study of religions across civilizations. And um, I went, and the books became flesh in a sense.
I like that.
The things I had read weren't so fixed, and there's pure souls who are Muslims who are devoted to charity and justice and generosity and helping me. And I still meet weekly with some of the participants in our program who help me, and I help them, and we read each other's work. And they're writing books now on multi-faith engagement, and so that was a transformational moment. Like, here I am studying the meme or the literary figure or the hermeneutical figure or the prototype in Islamic literature of the Christian and the Jew and others, and I was living in that reality, perceiving the world from those terms. And then I go to Morocco, and suddenly this is real life.
Yeah.
The we Going from theory to practice are two different things. You look into someone else's eyes, and you see them looking for understanding and companionship. It's incredibly powerful, and I haven't stopped going back. And it's tough. It's tough. The language barrier. My Arabic's still developing despite all the years of study, and the diversity of Arabic languages and dialects is complex. But the human element is what keeps me coming back.
Yeah, that is super interesting because that maps onto an experience I had earlier today. So as you're aware, I'm in Cambridge. I'm from Manchester. I'm not from Cambridge. And so I went to the Friday prayer today, and I was like, why not go to Cambridge Muslim College? It's well renowned. It has a well-known scholar, Dr. Timothy Winter. So I met one of the other people there, and he talked about this initiative they do where they take a bunch of students to Rome to go see the Vatican and learn more about Christianity. And he mentioned that today, and I remember having a bit of a like moment of, okay, this is kind of cool, but what's the point of it? But as you kind of explained to it today, like I guess it's right. It's see the people in the flesh, and through that sort of experience, it bonds it, or I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, and it has to work both ways, or in many ways, not just, it can't just be one-sided, and that goes for funding, for relationship building. We go to Morocco, and then scholars from Morocco come to the U.S. to experience the diversity of American religious experience. And they get to go to churches, they get to go to mosques, they get to do study. But it can't be, it can't just be educational. It really does have to be this deeper relationship that's built.
Yeah, and I really I'm very like this of the emphasis on the experience. So once again, just talking from my experience as a normal layman, I'm not in the field, just a normal Muslim person living in the UK, right? And one of the things that, as you kind of mentioned too, that I think the best way to kind of foster that relationship or that understanding is just by coexisting and having an open mind. Does it make sense? And I find that works for me. personally. So I really like this idea of, you probably put it better than me, through understanding the, other, whatever you want to call it, people of the other religion, or through experience, so actually meeting them, seeing that, this is more than just what I read about or what I heard about in my case, growing up.
Mm.
I think there's something powerful in that.
Yeah, and just to take it a step further, even moving beyond coexistence and tolerance, because that's been the order of things for a while, and despite that's breaking down in a bit, and I think we need to move beyond these understandings so that some kind of companionship, or some people don't like this term, but friendship can occur where there is long lasting bonds, and that you support each other either as citizens, as fundamental, those who understand that human life is valuable despite faith commitments, because we're so many other things that are beyond our faith commitments, even if that is the root. For example, for me, I mean, my faith commitments are the root of my identity, and everything kind of gets sucked into that. But that might not be the case for everyone. Um, so moving beyond just coexistence, because then it's almost like we're living in parallel instead of mixing together. And it's not that you can't hold on to your culture and your traditions. I was raised Lebanese with Lebanese food, and but also a good mix of American culture, and you know. I really appreciated that. Without agreeing with all of it, I did come to appreciate a lot of the kind of mixed traditions.
All right, yeah, yeah. I love that because I am a third culture kid as well. So I'm originally from Iraq, but I grew up in Canada, and then I moved back to the Middle East. So kind of as you said, then that sort of that upbringing has made me appreciate, both religions, both side of the spectrum. So I understand that. This is kind of just a question on the top of my head. So I know that you said we have to move beyond coexisting, but how do you see that? Because I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, it's quite the same in the US. In the UK, it's kind of a bit frowned upon, has become, or a bit to talk about religion in a way. And this is something that is always, you may have been realized in LinkedIn, that's always kind of not upset me. That, yeah, like well, so to even move to that position where you're saying where we beyond coexisting, how can we do that when just the mere talking about religion in the workplace or in the day to day, it becomes sort of
Yeah.
frowned upon? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a solution. The the idea that religion is moving from the public sphere is it's happening here in the U.S. too, and it just simply can't, because religion does shape society and is shaped by society. Uh, when religion shapes society, yes, it could be for honor or for harm, or for goodness or to evil ends. But we are the people who are represented, and we must represent ourselves and our beliefs in the public sphere. And I don't know what the experience is like on the ground there, but I'm certainly not quiet here. I make sure that it's my interest. Of course, it's my field, so I'm really comfortable talking about it because I have the knowledge. I do think that the only solution I have is the academic solution. Not that academics itself helps, but a lot of our young people do go into universities and need to learn how religion shapes public life. And there's centers for public policy that are appearing everywhere, and it doesn't always work, but it is one way to move forward. And for people not in the field of religious studies or academics, it has to happen through workplace relationships, and not simply coexisting, but having that courage to step across and get to know others as they know themselves. So, for example, at my church here, there's a women's cooking group where women from the mosque and women from the church cook together. It's a simple solution, but it does show some solidarity. I'm not sure it goes deep enough to sustain that relationship when we're in a time of war like now, and things seem to have kind of petered out.
Yeah.
Um, and that seems to be the case across the United States. I wish there were simple solutions. Um, I'm still pushing every day for a first step of how to understand, and resisting the temptation to listen to political narratives, because My faith commitment as a first order is to God, and my loyalty and fidelity is to God above all else. And there's no one's going to use my identity and politicize it and get me onto one side or the other. But I'm going to continue to be resilient and impact my family and have that courage to go to Morocco and have that courage to meet Muslims here in Dallas Fort Worth area and have that courage to step across the aisle and stand under scrutiny, and that's okay with me. I wish there was a better, more specific answer,
No,
but I think in the U.S., yeah.
I love that. I love that. I think I respect that a lot, and that's been one of the things that, as you kind of said, I think you just have to take ownership of it. So not to turn this podcast into something about me, but that's something that I've tried to do, and just be like, just talk about it, and take ownership of it. If that's something that's dear to you, and you feel that it should be talked about, then it should. So. You mentioned the main way that you saw, you're like the main sort of solution to is academia. You said that's kind of uh, the main the main way to do it. So how do you see the role of academia or academic scholarship in bridging these the gaps between those different religions, or even sometimes just cultural differences?
So I think there's other solutions. I think that because my field is academics, that's where I can make the
Yeah.
the biggest impact, and that's where I'm gonna try to make the biggest impact, and that's through this ungated material and even just blog posts and constant education and sharing. Um, if I understand your question, it's how is this going to change things? What is the
Yeah.
theory of change?
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Because
it is through training scholars. Um, I don't want to speak badly about any individual in an institution, whether at Oxford or Cambridge or some of our top universities here. Um, and I'm certainly struggling myself with this issue. Is there's all this deep study, but not a lot of experience. So coming back to this thing with experience too, is training our future teachers, graduate students, and undergraduate students how to engage in the public sphere to put their faith into action. But unfortunately, just like we were talking about in public life, where you don't want to talk about religion programs are closing. There's upwards of 4,500, or maybe making its way to 5,000 programs that offer courses in religion. But the scholars themselves are either overworked, don't have that experience, don't have the knowledge that they need to help students make informed decisions. And that can be in public life or in the workplace and wherever they might go. So it really does have to start with the faculty for the academic solution to see transformation in their own lives, so that they can speak from experience, so that they can make trips to different places and talk to scholars across the aisle, not just in collaborative papers, but ones that bring their religiosity and the humanities to real life. And that means bringing your own faith commitments to bear on your research without apology and without um, letting go of the academic side, the academic perspective. You can be seeking truth and providing what you believe is a somewhat detached analysis of a topic. Those things can exist at the same time, but the university's purpose really has been to remove that religiosity that we experience in our personal lives from university study, and what it ends up just being is what's cool and what's new, or what's most fascinating, and what's the newest book that's been authored. And the professors, they're brilliant at the top university. They're brilliant professors, but how are they? It's not always their role, but how are the higher tenured teachers and the tenured professors gaining experience that moves from theory to practice?
Yeah, yeah. I think that resonates, and I think that resonates across the board. The whole idea of theory to practice, and yeah, as you mentioned, it's nice to have all these nice fancy books and read them and get in little close circles and talk about them. But at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, I hate to be cliche, but they say experience the best teacher. But one of the things that I'm interested in is to sort of speaking in terms of personal impact. So, how has the study of Islam influenced your personal Christian faith? So we've been talking about raising awareness in Islam, but how has studying Islam influenced your, personal Christian faith?
It's made my faith walk very difficult.
Okay.
Um, so I'll start with that and then tell you how it benefits.
Okay, that's it.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, it's enhanced my understanding of humanity, but made me an outsider and pushed me to the fringes in a way. It's like, oh, you're the guy who studies Islam, or you know a lot about Islam, and really terrible things are said about Islam when they find that out, thinking that there's some kind of camaraderie and some kind of bond between the Christian community and some position that we hold uniquely as a group. Um, so that's made put me in a difficult position, but also a good position to teach. Studying Islam in text has, I'll give you an example, like Nawawi's 40 hadith. Um, I'm writing a book on the ethics of Islam, using him as a figure. You can open this book and read the whole thing in the English translation in 30 minutes. I mean, it's about maybe a minute or two, so per hadith, per report, and glean from the charity of Islam to give with eyes closed in many ways, not just to other Muslims, but to everyone. And as a believer, as a Christian, there seem to be limits on who you give to. Um, Christians will give to anyone and everyone if it's part of an organization, but giving of their time or their resources to help Muslims is just not on that agenda. And I don't want to make something out of nothing here, but the idea that it's a little embarrassing to say that Muslims can live a highly ethical life in devotion and obedience and submission to God is a huge eye-opening experience. That they too have a place before God. Um, it sounds simple, and it's a little embarrassing to say because it's so simple, but that's enriched my life. It's helped kind of be a great equalizer in loving others as God loves me, and loving others as I love myself, and treating others as I want to be treated. The very basics, showing mercy to all. It's brought the Bible to life, and that universal care for humanity and care for the human soul. Well, that's been the best part.
Yeah, I mean yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of it's interesting how you say that, understanding that has brought the Bible to life, and I think there's I mean, it's hard for me to comment on it because, as you know, I've not gone through that path. But yeah, it's something that I respect, and I think because this is the reason why I asked this question. Because I remember today I was just trying to imagine if the roles were flipped. I was like, imagine me as a Muslim, being in and Muslim guy who's in a scholar in Christianity. Do you know what I mean? And I just this is why I asked that question. I was like, I wonder what would be the sort of, you know what I mean? Um, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. The sort of remarks or the vibe I would get, from the environment, my friends or people around me.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? So that's why I wanted to ask that question because when I flipped the roles, I was like, I've never really thought of that. Do you know what I mean? Like, how would it feel if I was an Islamic guy who's a scholar in Christianity? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate you walking in my shoes, because then it sounds like, well, what are you trying to get at here? Are you proselytizing, trying to convert people? Are you just like, what? It really is a bit of a weird position. Weird is not a great word to use, but
Yeah.
it's a position that begs some questions.
Yeah.
From Others ask me questions rather about my ultimate purposes and aims, but it really is an upholding of all human life. And I see it written in the stars. You can see it in Europe now, that authoritarianism and nationalist identities are hijacking people's fidelity to God. And I want to be someone who stands with others, and you know, now that you say it, yeah, I mean, it must seem strange, yeah, when someone to see you, you know, Ali is a Christian Muslim scholar of Christianity, like, wait, what? Um, but basically, you know, it's an ecumenical approach. It's an ecumenical approach. You know, I'm actually thinking of maybe changing like
No, no, no.
my title because it kind of brings that, you know, what's at stake here, what's going
No, no,
on.
I'm have to. I think keep it. I think it's part of the intrigue, to be honest, because I remember that was when I first came across their content. You know, it's. I mean, for someone who's me, I'm curious. I like so it's actually part of the intrigue. You know, like okay, um, I don't know. It's up to you. It's a personal decision, but I think it's yeah, that kind of heading or whatnot. It's intriguing in a way. It makes people want to know. You know, like not in a negative way particularly, but and as you said, like when I gave you the roles are flipped kind of reversal, so that's kind of how I see it, but in a good way. I'm like, okay, so there's someone who's interested, but to bring this towards something, so what what I've really wanted to strive for in this podcast is how can sort of people who I think have something of value to offer to the world, how can they use that to sort of because you know there's a lot of madness going in today's world or modernity and whatnot. So how do you think, or what's the most that you can use all your knowledge and experiences to tackle, you know, some of the issues today? So how do you and talking just in general around the role of religion, you know, as you said, Islam, Christianity. So how could having a better understanding or awareness, how could that help with some of the issues, if I phrase that correctly, in today's modern world? So why would someone, for example, listening to this podcast, you'd be like, okay, so what? You know, he's interested. He's in like, why shall I know? You know, what's that got to do with today? You know, what's that got to do with my issues? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a great question. What do people do? I know what scholars can do, and I've talked about that, and
Mhm.
future teachers can do. For those who have faith commitments and have an imam or a rabbi or a pastor or a priest or whoever else, it's crucial that you speak to them and understand more about the positions. How does God covenant with people, and what is our position? And to know where you stand in relationship or by reference to that,
Hmm.
and encourage your local community to get involved by building coalitions with others that you're going to stand and march together when there's violence against Muslims or Christians,
Hmm.
for any case. And we've seen that a lot here in Dallas Fort Worth when there's terror, Christian terror. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
Building coalitions between institutions is crucial, especially um, faith institutions.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I totally agree with that. And I think what I was a long-winded way of asking the question, maybe I didn't phrase it correctly, but so from my personal view, and this is just, you know, not someone who's done his homework or whatnot, but I always think from my personal lived experience, the role of religion in today's modern world, I think one of the big impacts it could have, I think, is there's kind of a crisis of purpose or meaning in a lot of people's lives. That's my personal take, and I just think if there was a bit more of maybe I don't know, maybe because like I'm in the UK, which I consider quite secular, the role of religion can sort of inject a bit of I don't know what the word I'm looking for, meaning or purpose in today's world, if that makes sense. So what do you think is sort of the big contribution it can have? Because a lot of people will, you know, they'll say, yeah, religion's outdated. It doesn't really have a role to play. Like it's not going to change my life today. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
what do you think is the role that, from your perspective, you know, this whole interfaith dialogue religion, what's the kind of role can it have and how can it help tackle some of, you know, the modern problems today? Uh,
Yeah, I mean, the idea that society is going to somehow become more secular is just not happening, and it hasn't come true. The secular dream has not come true, and the world's becoming more religious. Um, and so I'm not sure I have a particular answer.
mhm,
Um, But for those that do have religion, that do have a commitment, um, it's important that they engage
All
through
right.
hospitality and service to others. But I don't have an answer for those who are non-religious, except that I truly believe that the knowledge of God is accessible to everyone, and does find its way into people's lives, either through suffering, through loss, even through joy and blessing. Um, and I don't have a clear cut answer on how everyday people can um, make sense of this, except to understand that not every Muslim you meet is a practicing Muslim, not every Christian you meet is a practicing one, or they're
Mm,
not fully. And having that simple understanding that because someone might have a faith commitment or might be Muslim by name only, and don't go to Friday prayer, don't do their prayers, um, you know. Not to make assumptions about them, and to have an open canvas to understand people and the way that they identify with the world and the way that they relate to the world. I know it's a little bit broad and I'm kind of avoiding a specific
no,
answer
that's fine.
here, but people have overlapping identities. And when I'm teaching Christians about Islam, for example, I just make sure that they know that they have enough information now to be dangerous. So don't assume that everyone wants to talk to you about this. Um, our common humanity is in service and care for one another, in the workplace, in academic life, in um, public life, in the public square, in diplomacy, and across all industry, if I can put it that way.
No, that's well put, and I like the fact that you mentioned it, which is something I was trying to get at with that. Don't just assume, and there's different layer, there's different. I don't know what the word I'm looking for, spectrum or layers. As you said, like if someone's by Muslim, that doesn't mean by default he's doing everything, he's praying. You have the people who are doing
Yeah.
the Friday prayer, and you have someone who he's just like Muslim by name. It's not just it's not black and white. That's what I'm trying to say. But so now just to sort of move this to your future goals. So this is the question, Chris, the $1 million question. So where is this all going? What's the sort of where do you go from here? What's the end goal, or not the end goal, but what are your future projects, initiatives? So what are you trying to achieve in the upcoming 5, 10 years, or throughout this path you've started, shall I say?
I think having a more robust curriculum in Christian seminaries would be kind of the bread and butter for me. How do we implement curriculum that is not politically influenced, that is faith based, into Christian seminaries? And how do we get those Christian seminaries working with Muslim seminaries in the US? I do have global goals as well, but because I'm an American, that's something that I want to see here in America. I want I would be most effective in Christian seminaries, I think, in implementing kind of higher level knowledge and trainings of future teachers, so that they can implement well informed writings also from Muslims, not just Christians like me who are writing about Islam. And I'd encourage that probably more than my own contributions. On a global scale, I would like to see more intercollegiate, international collaboration that isn't just academic but is public facing. And these relationships are sustained through private funding, um, Arab money, other money, not just Christian evangelical money or the US money, but something where everyone makes a contribution and shows that generosity and charity, just to foster a sense of solidarity between peoples who are different. We must live this way. Islam was its best when it was the most plural. And Christianity is the best when it's most plural. And the track records for all people and all civilizations have highs and lows. But I want to see more robust education as a first step. And I'm going to leave the second step to others. But I feel like I can make a really good contribution and demonstrate what it's like to be in a committed friendship with Muslims, or companionship, if that works better.
All right, yeah, yeah, that makes sense, and I think so. So just to sort of because I'm conscious of time, to wrap this up. So for someone who tuned in to this podcast and is listening to this conversation, what would your advice be? Like what is the take home message, shall I say, or for someone who's been going through this podcast, and what would your advice be to the audience, shall I say?
Build trust with others.
Mm-hmm.
The most basic thing that we can all do is to build trusting relationships through hospitality, through loving one another as we love ourselves and our own families. Invite people into your homes, obviously who you feel and who have you feel safe inviting in. To do the good works that Muslims and Christians do, it requires courage. It requires fortitude. It requires mutual justice. And so invite someone, get to know them either through your pastor, your priest, your imam, your rabbi, whoever it is that is your faith leader. And if they're not interested, do it yourself. Find a coalition to be a part of. Find a group to be a part of. It does hold. It requires our effort to do good. It won't just happen for us, and we don't want the state to interact. We want to do this as people so that we are the ones contributing to a better moral order. If for future students, get involved in a program that isn't just educational in terms of book knowledge. Find something where you can get experience, a public policy program, a faith program where you can travel abroad, study abroad if you can, to understand other cultures as they understand themselves.
I love that. I think I resonate with that personally. Study abroad, and I think for me personally, that's also helped me understand, other cultures, other religions, and sort of other viewpoints. So get out of your, I hate to say that, but get out of sort of your comfort bubble or your comfort zone, and put yourself out there, for lack of a better word. So before I wrap this up, I mean, you are based in the US. Do you have sort of any plans of, are you any initiatives outside? I mean, are you planning to come to the UK sometime? Maybe what's on the radar? Or
Right now is an overhaul of the Study of Religions Across Civilizations program that's hosted at Georgetown. So that's the first thing I'm working on, and so I'll continue to work on that and apply for money and look to bring scholars from the U.S. to the MENA region, the Middle East and North African region. So that's first on the docket. I'm also looking to potentially enter academia again, formally in a professorship. So
nice.
That's what's next. I do have some soft, tentative plans to build some coalitions with Muslim seminaries here in the U.S. with our program. But that's really my main effort. And any chance I get to volunteer in my church and faith community to bring cultural education with my friends and my partners in Morocco especially, I'll take advantage of that so that it doesn't always have to be about religion. It can also be learning about others through culture.
Brilliant. All right. And final question to wrap up. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you do?
The first place to find me is on my main website, chrisprejean.me. That's CHRIS, and PreJean, like pray, and then Jean, Jean, PREJEAN. And then the religionsacrosscivilizations.org, where you can learn more about the global vision of our program.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Absolute pleasure having you on board. And until next time, it's been a blast.
Until next time, thanks for having me.